There's a quiet kind of confidence that rarely gets noticed. It belongs to the person who no longer checks their phone hoping for a message. The one who isn't rushing to download another dating app after a disappointing conversation. The one who can attend weddings, anniversaries, and romantic celebrations without feeling like they're falling behind. At first glance, many people assume they've stopped believing in love. But what if the opposite is true? What if they've simply stopped believing that love should be chased? Our culture teaches us that finding a relationship is a milestone, almost a requirement for happiness. Movies celebrate it. Social media rewards it. Friends ask about it. Family members remind us of it. Over time, it's easy to absorb the idea that being single means something is missing. Yet psychology tells a far more interesting story. Some people eventually reach a point where they stop organizing their lives around the search for romance, not because they've become hopeless, but because they've discovered something far more valuable than constant pursuit. They've discovered themselves. This transformation rarely happens overnight. It's usually built from dozens of experiences that quietly reshape the way someone sees relationships. Perhaps they spent years trying to become everything another person wanted. Maybe they ignored red flags because they feared being alone. Or perhaps they kept confusing attention with affection, only to realize those two things are rarely the same. Little by little, an uncomfortable question begins to surface. What if I've been investing more energy into finding love than into understanding myself? That question changes everything. Instead of asking, who will choose me? They begin asking, what kind of life do I actually want to build? It's a subtle shift. But psychologically, it's enormous. When self-worth depends heavily on another person's approval, every rejection feels personal. Every unanswered message feels like evidence. Every breakup feels like proof that something is fundamentally wrong. The mind becomes trapped in a cycle of seeking reassurance from outside instead of creating stability within. Emotional exhaustion follows. Ironically, the harder someone chases validation, the further genuine connection often seems to drift away. This isn't because they're unworthy. It's because anxiety changes behavior. People begin overthinking conversations. They compromise their boundaries. They ignore their intuition. They become more concerned with being accepted than being authentic. Eventually, some individuals recognize this pattern. And they decide they're no longer willing to pay that emotional price. This decision is often misunderstood. Friends might say they've become too independent. Others assume they're afraid of commitment. Some even believe they're secretly lonely. Yet those assumptions overlook something important. Solitude and loneliness are not the same experience. Loneliness is the absence of meaningful connection. Solitude is the presence of peace. One drains you. The other can restore you. People who embrace this distinction often discover that being alone creates room for something they had neglected for years. Their own identity. Without constantly adapting to someone else's expectations, they begin asking forgotten questions. What excites me? What challenges me? What kind of future actually reflects my values? Those answers rarely arrive during the noise of constant pursuit. They emerge during quiet moments of reflection. This explains why many emotionally independent people appear calmer. They're no longer measuring their value through external attention. Their emotional center shifts inward. Psychologists sometimes describe this as developing an internal locus of control. Instead of believing happiness depends on circumstances they can't control, they begin investing in the choices they can control. Their habits. Their health. Their friendships. Their purpose. Their growth. Notice something interesting. None of these require another person's permission. That realization becomes incredibly liberating. Another fascinating change happens almost without notice. They become more selective. Not because they've become difficult. Because they've become clear. They've learned that chemistry alone isn't enough. Shared values matter. Emotional maturity matters. Kindness matters. Consistency matters. Respect matters. They no longer confuse intensity with compatibility. And that's one of the biggest psychological shifts anyone can experience. Many relationships begin with excitement. Healthy relationships survive because of stability. Those are not the same thing. People who stop chasing love often become remarkably patient. They understand that forcing timing rarely creates lasting connection. Instead of trying to accelerate intimacy, they allow trust to develop naturally. That patience protects them from many painful situations they once would have entered without hesitation. Another misconception deserves attention. Some people believe emotionally independent individuals have stopped believing in romance altogether. Actually, many still want love. They've simply stopped treating it as the foundation of their identity. Love becomes something to share, not something to complete them. That distinction changes every interaction. Conversations become more genuine. Boundaries become easier to maintain. Disagreements become less threatening. Why? Because the relationship no longer carries the impossible burden of providing all their happiness. Their emotional life already has multiple sources of meaning. Friendships. Learning. Creativity. Purpose. Family. Adventure. Personal achievement. Romantic love becomes one beautiful chapter, not the entire book. Research in psychology consistently shows that people with a stronger sense of self tend to navigate relationships with greater resilience. When conflict appears, they don't immediately assume abandonment. When disappointment arrives, they don't automatically question their worth. Their identity remains intact. And that's one of the healthiest emotional foundations anyone can build. There's another unexpected benefit. Once people stop chasing love, they often become more curious about life itself. They explore interests they postponed for years. They travel. Learn new skills. Read more. Volunteer. Build businesses. Develop creative talents. Strengthen lifelong friendships. None of these activities guarantee romance. But all of them enrich the person experiencing life. Ironically, fulfillment itself often becomes attractive. Not because it's performed. Because it's genuine. People naturally gravitate toward individuals who seem comfortable in their own lives. Confidence that grows from authenticity feels very different from confidence built to impress others. One seeks attention. The other simply exists. And people can sense the difference. Perhaps the greatest lesson here isn't about dating at all. It's about freedom. Freedom from constantly wondering whether you're enough. Freedom from comparing your timeline to everyone else's. Freedom from believing happiness begins only after someone chooses you. Real emotional independence doesn't reject love. It removes desperation from it. When love eventually arrives, it's welcomed, not clung to. It becomes a partnership between two whole people rather than an attempt to repair two incomplete lives. That creates a very different kind of relationship. One built on mutual respect instead of emotional dependency. One sustained by choice instead of fear. So if you've stepped away from the endless pursuit of romance, don't mistake your pause for failure. Sometimes distance creates clarity. Sometimes silence reveals truth. Sometimes the strongest act of self-respect is refusing to chase what isn't meant for you. And if you're still searching, perhaps the most meaningful question isn't, when will I find the right person? Maybe it's this. Am I becoming the kind of person who feels at home within myself? Because the healthiest love rarely begins the moment two people meet. It often begins much earlier. The day someone stops searching for another person to complete their life. and starts building a life that already feels complete on its own.